Peace and love, family. Welcome to another Read Book Club discussion. Tonight, we are discussing Chapter 5 of The Color of Money, Black Banks, and a Racial Wealth Gap by Mehrsa Baradaran. All right, Chapter 5 is entitled Civil Rights Dreams, Economic Nightmares. Wow. And so before we went live, Brother T, you asked me, well, you were sharing with me your thoughts about this chapter. You said, how did you like it? And I said that I thoroughly enjoyed this chapter because it gave us an overview of the civil rights movement. It talked about the Watts riots that ensued, during the movement, or when the movement was pretty much dying off. It talked about the Watts riots. It talked about some of the figures in the Black Power movement, the Black Panther Party, Stokely Carmichael, Huey P. Newton, Malcolm X. I also liked how it talked about Dr. King in a way that we're not accustomed to hearing about him, right? Like she emphasized how towards the latter part of his life, how he was pushing Black nationalism. But in fact, let's go back to 1963. She talked about the I Have a Dream speech. And she said, well, look, the only parts that people hear is when he says, oh, I have a dream that my children will be judged by the content of their content of their character, not by the color of their skin. But she said they missed a whole section when he was talking about, hey, we need a check. So I just think that she did a wonderful job explaining, like I said, the civil rights movement, Black Power movement, describing Dr. King, Huey P. Newton, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael. Can't forget Stokely Carmichael. Talked about Lyndon B. Johnson when he was president and how he was kind of torn between white conservatives and Black folks. And so she did a wonderful job. What are your thoughts on it?
I wouldn't say torn. I just think that he was like, as they stated in the book, he knew how to play the Southern Bloc. He was a master at it as being a Texas, I think, congressman. So he definitely knew how to play the game. Talking about LBJ, even though a lot of the civil rights came through his administration, it came through a lot of pulling teeth, as you see at the end. And he played pretty well in being a sympathizer until the latter end of his administration, as he sought to be more tough on crime. And the turn of the next administration, as they now went from poverty into start focusing on crime. So it just amazed me. I love this chapter because she did a chronological order of how things unfold. And that's the beauty of this book, because we learned about all of the housing rights that's been denied, all the employment rights that have been denied, and other federal programs. This chapter focused on it being given to us, how we acted, and how a new administration was using stuff from Nixon to add more plight to the Black experience.
And I want to, oops, I didn't mean to show that comment. Tell me, can you please get it from him? And so, yeah, Brother T, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I just wanted to shout out some folks who are in the chat. New Black World Order, peace to you, brother. I thank you so much for being here. And I heard last night you were holding down the fort, because last night I brought on Brother T, Student Minister Nuri Muhammad. And yeah, we talked about the destruction of the Black male image and how it impacts men psychologically and emotionally and even physically. We talked about that last night. We also talked about how it impacts Black male and female relationships. And so it was a lot of trolls in the chat. And so people kept telling me, they said, oh man, New Black World Order, he was deleting folks and getting folks out of there. And so I just want to say thank you so much, King. I truly appreciate that. A beautiful mind. She wrote me a beautiful message, Brother T, underneath one of our shows. She was just talking about how, the shows on this channel are very, informative. And, and she was just saying she give thanks for that. And I was just like, messages like that, Brother T, it keeps you going, like it motivates you, it makes you feel like, okay, somebody is listening, somebody is hearing, what we're saying. And so I just appreciated that message from you, a beautiful mind. Peace and love to Sister Crystal Denise. Peace and love to you, Queen. Let me know when you're going to do part 2 of the HBCU day for your students. Okay. Matter of fact, I thought about you, Sister Crystal, on Friday. Baba Amin from the Uhuru Academy, they were having a Black History Month program, and they asked me to be there. I was the guest speaker for the program, honored to do that. And I thought about you, and I said, "Oh man, I missed an opportunity to speak to your students." So I'm looking forward to the rescheduling of that. Um, Peace and love to you. Readings by Callie. This sister, brother T, she tagged me in a story that she put online of what was going on last night. And so she's always promoting the show. She has her young seed. She's raising a young warrior. And so she'll turn off the cartoons and she'll put me on the screen. And so I do appreciate that queen. And so peace to everyone in the chat. Peace and love to all. All right. And so tonight we're discussing chapter 5 of The Color of Money, Civil Rights Dreams, Economic Nightmares. If you don't have the book, still sit back and participate in the discussion. Don't run, because a lot of people say, "Oh, they're discussing the book. Let me get out of here." Then you start seeing the numbers drop. So no, family, please, if you haven't read the book, that's fine. If you don't own it or haven't read, that's fine. Just still stay. All right, just stay. And so, brother T, I want you to go ahead and kick it off. I know you normally like to read the first paragraph in the book, so I'll pass the mic to you, brother.
Good evening, family. Yes, we're reading from chapter 5, Civil Rights, Dreams, Economic Nightmares. I wanted to focus on this chapter, but on paragraph 1, and it was talking about when President Kennedy stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and this is the promise that he made, basically. Um, and he acknowledged that blacks were not yet freed from the bonds of injustice, and he promised to complete the work begun by Abraham Lincoln to eradicate the vestiges and discrimination of segregation. So now, a year later, at the same memorial, Dr. Martin Luther King led the March on Washington and asked the country to honor its founding principles of equality. When King Coalition Disciplined Nonviolence was met with the South's unruly backlash against federal law, cameras captured the clash and made the case for the petitioners. "We will soon wear you down by our capacity to suffer," said Dr. King.
And that's the part I wasn't feeling
Right.
when he said that we'll wear you down
And this is
by our capacity to suffer. I wasn't
right,
feeling that part. Like, I
right,
understand, yeah, I understand the whole idea of like the
right.
nonviolence was a strategy and stuff like that. But I agree with Stokely Carmichael in
Mm-hmm.
that nonviolence works with people who have a damn conscience.
Conscious,
So
right.
these people were they didn't have a damn conscience. So you want me to keep on being nonviolent and getting water holes sprayed on me and dogs sicked on me and
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting bottles thrown at me and people spitting. So when Dr. King said that part, that we will soon wear you down, our capacity to suffer. In my mind, I was thinking maybe that's his Christian background,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, with the Christian doctrine, it's like it's or the meek shall inherit the earth, and we all to be
Turn out the cheek.
to suffer, yet turn the other cheek. To suffering is to be Christ-like, and to suffer. So I was like, okay, maybe this is his Christianity, his
Mm-hmm.
Christian background kicking in. But um, I definitely wasn't feeling that. Go ahead, brother T. You had a thought.
And my and my and me, I read this and I thought, wow, this is definitely something to say.
Mhm.
Um, I was thinking Dr. King knew that he was on the world stage, and one way to show a person ugliness is letting them display it.
Absolutely, I agree.
So,
I agree.
so I think if anything, in a sense, it could be flawed to put yourself through that much punishment just to show that the other person is that wicked. But that is the first half of his strategy,
Right.
and this is why I think the author placed it in the way right after. I mean, in this chapter, so we can see exactly how much he started to change at the near 68, um, early in 63. When we see here, he was basically saying hey, we're willing to do anything we can, but at a peaceful point. And then he later saw that this dream became a nightmare
Yeah.
based off of 2 years, as he talked about the sweltering heat of August in 1963, that he now realized that what he echoed, people took parts of just to build their liberal backing. They wanted to focus on just the content of their character, of the story of his children being known for their character, not the color of their skin, because now they can use that to justify what federal funding and programs that they were going to create. They said, remember, you don't want to be judged for your skin. And as we learn later on in this chapter, that premise was used as ammunition to write the laws, not to make sure it's not race based, even though he was fighting for economic inclusion.
No, absolutely. I was sitting here thinking like, yeah, absolutely. It kind of and you can correct me if I'm wrong, brother T. So what you're basically saying is that, like you said, they took that piece, and then
Mm-hmm.
when folks were trying to, or legislators were proposing race-based policies, they said,
Mm-hmm.
oh, no, 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 we can't be race-based because, Dr. King, remember, we're advocating for a colorblind society. So what it did was it kind of bit us in the butt, as my grandmother would say. That's what you're saying. It
That's
kind
what it
of,
was. I
yeah.
mean, and
Mhm.
the author wrote it down perfectly. She said that basically that these laws had discrimination written all over it, right?
Mhm.
But once we remove the discrimination part from the law, you should be okay, right?
Yeah,
Because
that's what they thought.
we judge you because you were black. Now that we're not seeing black, we let you live where we are, let you work where we are, and we're not saying we're doing this because you're black. Basically, this underhand motion was we want to make sure we continue to be above you. And one way to do that is making sure that we cut you off economically. That makes me think about these sanctions, how the United States have the power to cut people off economically at will. They're doing it right now through the turmoil going through the world right now. And you also saw them do it in sanctions on countries like Venezuela. If
Yeah.
they're upset with you,
Haiti.
Haiti, they say, hey, we'll cut all ties of your financial. And even though you can still do what you got to do, but you won't receive any of that benefit. Yes, it's different. So I don't want people to say, hey, this is apples and oranges. But I'm saying the ability to close a people out financially, they can do that, and they have done that, and this is what this chapter shows perfectly.
Absolutely. And so let's jump into it, brother T. So she begins with discussing President Kennedy
Mm-hmm.
and how it says he urged Congress to pass a sweeping civil rights bill in 1963. He says not merely for reasons of economic efficiency, world diplomacy, and domestic tranquility, but above all because it is right. And so he was saying things like, look, there's little value in a Negro's obtaining the right to be admitted into hotels and restaurants if he has no cash in his pocket or no job. So what's the point of giving them all of these rights if that doesn't accompany any type of economics? Okay. And then we know that President Kennedy was assassinated. And after he was assassinated, President Lyndon B. Johnson became president. And I want to get this straight, brother T. And I don't know why she didn't mention this in this book. Lyndon B. Johnson, he didn't like Dr. I mean, he worked with Dr. King, and I think he was trying to be on the right side of history. But it's recordings of Lyndon B. Johnson calling Dr. King niggas and all kinds of stuff. All right. So let's not act like he was just this white savior who wanted to do so much for black people.
Mm-hmm.
He was definitely a I'll just say a man who was a product of his time, a product of
Right.
his era.
And
But he
that's
did go ahead.
I'm sorry, and that's why I mentioned earlier about LBJ being the hold 'em up guy. He knew this game pretty well, as we learned early chapters in his book about the Southern Bloc. Well, he was a master of stopping civil rights um, being part of that Southern Bloc um, politics that stopped a lot of things from going to the floor. So he understood how to get things done.
Right.
So we're like, all right, the death of Kennedy, it was heartfelt for the nation. I need to make things right because these are some of the things that was on the table. I know how to get it done because I know how to deal with the South because I'm one of them Southern boys. So he always been known for that quick tongue, but he wanted to have a clean slate based off what happened during the presidency of John F. Kennedy.
No, absolutely. And so then, the Civil Rights Act passed in July of 1964, which banned racial discrimination in employment and all public accommodations. In August of 1965, the Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which guaranteed blacks the right to vote. All right. And it says both laws were immediately enforced. And I want to be clear here because remember, I was telling you in the falsification of African consciousness, Dr. Amos Wilson talked about how laws are only as good as the people who enforce them, right? And so it says here that both laws were immediately enforced by the administration and the Supreme Court. Blacks achieved more rights in a few short years than they had in the previous 200 years. All right. And so, again, going back to what you said earlier, T, a lot of whites said, oh, now that they're banning discrimination, we're all on the same playing field, not understanding that, wait a minute, there needs to be redress from the economic segregation that black people have experienced in this country for hundreds of years. So, we couldn't create wealth when we were enslaved, chattel slavery. And then
Mm-hmm.
they set up the system, Jim Crow semi-slavery, where we couldn't create wealth. Our black banks failed. Our black businesses failed. They destroyed thriving black communities that we did create. For example, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Durham, North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina, and other flourishing black communities. So you had black massacres. Then you had all sorts of stuff. So there was never any type of redress for all of the stuff that happened. So in their white minds, they thought, okay, well, now that they banned discrimination, all of a sudden, we're on the same, we're on the same, we're on the same page. The playing field has now been evened, and it hasn't. And so she talks about that, and then she talked about how the violence of Northern segregation had been sown years before and was actually continually bearing another sort of strange fruit, economic exploitation. So now, with the banning of discrimination, okay, the white only signs are down, okay,
Mm-hmm.
at the restaurants, at the water fountains, right? Now you're able to, come to our schools. But what continued was economic exploitation. And that soon culminated, or that was the catalyst or the spark, because black folks
Mm-hmm.
got tired to the Watts riots. Brother T, did you wanna chime in?
Yes. I wanted to expound on what you just said, but I want before that I want to go back to the speed that LBJ by enacting these laws. And she did speak in this chapter on page 135, the the tale of the tapes of Johnson and Johnson. You had LBJ, right, and you also had Andrew Johnson had taken president um, as the death of Abraham Lincoln, and how he took the plans on the table of the president at the time and took them away to give them to the Southerners, right, to the losers of the battle. LBJ knew he had to be fast after the death of John F. Kennedy. Okay, so she massively made sure that was in the same page, so we can see exactly how he was more heralded as a fast acting president for them to mention this in that chapter, how he quickly got it done, and he didn't take off the plans of Kennedy that he made on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. He wanted to make sure that at least those plans were enacted. And as it was said in the chat, is that in the movie Selma, they showed how they backed LBJ against the wall, basically to make sure these things happen. Um, and definitely on what you were speaking on moving to North. Well, it was for people to migrate to the north, they had to remove the violence, the outward violence, or the perception, just to move them to the second phase of racism and white supremacy is to exclude them from economic inclusion. So it was the next phase. It was like, hey, now I'm going to give you the opportunity to work, but now I'm going to put these things into place that keeps you working for a longer and non-fruitful process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you say that they backed LBJ against the wall, the they are who? When you say they backed him against the wall, who are we talking about here? I want to
They
be
look
clear.
at as that, Dr. King, and the Southern movement, civil rights movement. They had, as we know, they had constant meetings with the administration,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
they pushed them to get those things, those plans passed.
That Kennedy. So okay,
Right.
so yeah, 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 yeah.
So
So
the
they
housing and all them things that came out in '65, they wanted to make sure those things put to play. And as we know later on in the chapter, she also brings a good point of how LBJ went on the steps of Howard University to talk about affirmative action, how that need to be put in place because we have been through so much in history. So they wanted to make sure those plans were put into action
Thank you,
because
Black
they
Buddha. Thank you, Black Buddha. Go ahead, Brother T. I'm sorry. I wanted to thank
um,
Black Buddha. He said Dr. King and those who want to change. He said those were the people that backed LBJ into the backed him up against the wall to say, hey, you
right.
need to. So that's why I said he just wasn't this white person that came into office and said, I just want to do all these great things for black people.
Oh no, not
It
at all.
wasn't, yeah,
Oh, not at
it
all. You
wasn't
gotta
that.
understand the intricate combination of the civil rights movement and what Dr. King and, like I said, people who wanted change of the SCLC wanted change to get things done. That was the Southern Civil Rights Unit. So these rights were talked about, and if it wasn't going to get done, I'm sure there would have been more marching and more protests. So they've been done, but we saw they were shells of what
Absolutely.
needed to be done.
No, absolutely. And so I want to move into the bottom of page 139, where she talks about how Dr. King's dream was really diluted, right? Because they only take bits and pieces of, what he says, and that's the famous, I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. She said, in actually, in that same speech, she said Dr. King was asking for the nation for redress of past wrongs, specifically in economic terms. So I'll just bear with me, family. I want to read this part of the speech to you that they don't put on the news whenever they celebrate Dr. King. He says, in a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, will be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I would argue him down that they did not have black people in mind when they created these documents. But
Right.
okay, it says it is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds, but we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and security and justice. And so she goes on to say that Dr. King was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi. We know that Mahatma Gandhi was racist. We found that out later. But he was, Dr. King did say that he was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, but he was a racist too. Not too, but he was also racist. Um, she goes on to say how Dr. King understood that blacks have been excluded from full economic participation, and he maintained that any strides towards civil rights had to be linked with anti poverty programs to be effective because the inseparable twin of racial justice was economic justice. She says, yet King acknowledged that the latter was more difficult battle because it would require a radical change. And that's why I always say Dr. King was ahead of his time, because he said, wait a minute, in order for us to receive, economic justice, then we had to reform this whole structure. Shit. I mean, he said reform. Stokely Carmichael said, the hell with reform, throw it away, right? Throw it away and implement a new structure, because this structure was set up to maintain a racial hierarchy where you have so-called whites at the top and so-called blacks at the bottom. And so he knew that it would take about a radical change. So, Dr. King, who was a student of history, understood what the New Deal policies, how that impacted Black America. So he's looking at it and saying, okay, we need something just as robust as the New Deal programs in order to, I guess, close the racial wealth gap, in order to eradicate poverty from American society, specifically the Black communities. Brother T, did you want to get into it?
And yeah, I wanted to go to the page just before, page 138. The
You keep
move
going.
suddenly
You keep going
huh?
back. I said you keep going back. Go ahead though.
No, just one page, just one
Okay.
page, just
All
one
right. Go
page.
ahead. Go ahead.
Because it goes to what you just stated about him being ahead of his time, and but fighting for the equality. And because you read that part of the "I Have a Dream" speech, I wanted to make sure that we discuss when whites wanted equality too. When
Yes.
they
Yes. Yes.
so it was basically the mood suddenly turned by the end of the decade. Whites were lambasting the government for depriving whites for their rights of equality. So it became almost a gesture for them to say, hold up, all this equality talk, what about our equality?
Oh goodness.
I think that we're being, looked past. And you start to ask, like, how do you think, you're being looked past when these laws are for the people that has been discriminated and held back? Well, they look at, well, I want these laws too. So they start to criticize or basting these government policies that they said, hey, I want part of it too. So then he goes off to say, when we start going north, right, the edge of the sword of equality was used to cut down any claims for special privileges. Why are you giving blacks special privileges over us? Does that sound familiar today? If blacks demanded that they will be judged by the basis of their race, using the same logic, whites demanded that blacks not given any special favors based on their race. So this is how they start to break down what was given. So when you hear anyone give that talk on, you know, why affirmative action should be taken away, well, do you know why affirmative action was put into place?
Come on.
So for those who say we need to be put on even playing ground, don't understand that there was never even playing ground. There's always been people who were above where we were. So when it came down to economics and these policies and these rights, but it's a play on words because they wanted to focus on race. They wanted to focus on black, white. They didn't want to focus on anything else. If let me read that again. Equality was used to cut down any claims for special privileges. If blacks demanded that they not be judged based on race or color, using the same logic, whites demanded that blacks not be given any special favors because these laws were set up to make it seem as if you're no longer being judged on the color of your skin. Now, only by the content of your character. Now, I want to see your work ethic. Work. That's basically what they're saying. And we know that we're still being discriminated at work and everywhere else.
Absolutely. That was powerful, brother T. I highlighted it. I'm underlining it with my when I want to emphasize something, I do both. I use my pen and I use my highlight. But that was very powerful. And you said something to the effect earlier in the discussion, how they kind of use that to say, well, we shouldn't give them special, favors, or special
it
policies.
it helped them to color and help them to design the law to make it seem like it's not discriminatory, so they can still hide the next phase. As in the South, they just said no drinking here, no using the bathroom here, no eating here. Now they put in the North, I'll allow you to eat here, I'll allow you to drink here, I'll allow you to go to school here, but I'm going to underlining now turn on that fine print so you can now not stay where you are, and I can keep you where I want you while we advance. So they now turned up the notch on how they wanted to show racism based off of that logic that she placed in this part of the chapter.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more, Sister Crystal. It says, you said, I'm telling you, the more things change, the more things remain the same, right? She said racism redefined, recreated, and reworded. Exactly. And so during this time when all of these civil rights were being passed, okay, she gives us some stats on page 141. Okay. She says that almost half of Black children lived in poverty, in contrast with only 9% of white children. Black families had less than 1/5 of the wealth of white families. A Federal Reserve study concluded that the source of the wealth gap was historic inequalities in income and opportunities. They knew this, T. They knew this. So then it says, okay, it says opportunities, a legacy of past economic deprivation, which would not be fixed even if the income gap were eliminated. The study held that it could only be closed by a reversal of past privileges. And see, white people don't want to give up their privileges. All right. So now, so she talks about that. And so then it says the situation was explosive. 16 days after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, Harlem erupted in violence. 5 days after the Voting Rights Act was signed into law, the Watts district in Los Angeles exploded in a deadly riot that killed and injured many and destroyed millions of dollars of property. So civil rights were being passed, but at the same time, Black people were living in poverty and tired of it. They were tired of paying higher costs for rent, higher interest in mortgage, being confined to Black ghettos. They were tired of being unemployed. I think it was a stat in here, and I was not in front of me, but at one particular place, 1 out of 3 Black folks were unemployed. Black people were tired of paying, on these, they were paying higher for goods. So if you lived in the city, you pay more for products. Okay, you paid more for everything if you lived in the city or you lived in these poor areas. And T, when I read that, I said it's just like that today. When you go to go around the way, you have these mom and pop stores, or we used to say the corner store in Baltimore. You go to the corner store and you look at a bag of chips. You go into the county, that bag of chips may have been like 50 cents or something. You go into the city, that same bag of chips is like $1.50. I mean, this is what I even would remember as a kid, because I grew up in Baltimore County, but my grandmother lived in Baltimore City. And so in the county, we had 7-Eleven up the street, it had Dash in, you go to, but then when I go to the corner store, where around my grandmother's, I said, wait a minute, these chips, why they cost? I'm noticing it was a difference in price. And that was even as a child that I noticed that when we would take our little money and go to the corner store to get candy or treats or whatever. And so it's still like that today. And so during the riots, after all of that exploded, remember, they said, oh, we need to find out what's going on. We need to quell this violence. We need to find out what was going on. And so, well, one thing before I go into what the remedies were, I do want to say that the rioters did not harm Black-owned businesses. It says that they were burning down a lot of property, a lot of businesses that were owned by white people. I know that they teach us that they were looting, but it says in this book that they weren't really looting. They was doing some looting, but they were really going into these stores to burn the books, Because remember, we would go into some of these stores and get credit,
Right.
right? Go ahead, T. Explain that. It seemed like you want to get in. Go ahead, explain that.
Yeah, I was waiting.
Go ahead, brother T.
Basically, yes, this is the difference, and I love the way she presented it in this book.
Mm-hmm.
She shared that installment credit was different than credit. Even though we were allowed to get merchandise, we paid for it in a much costly manner with
Mm-hmm.
high interest that caused most of us to default, and not just the item being taken away. Sometimes we lost our jobs based off, and we, like you said, that stat you had from 1 out of 3 were unemployed, correct?
Yes.
They couldn't afford these high installment payments. As we found out, it stated that majority of the urban businesses moved out because of how poor the ghetto was. They couldn't sustain themselves. So for those who stayed in the ghetto, they had less sales. So what happened? They upped the price of their goods.
Mm.
So when it came down to the riots in LA and Watts, they realized that, hey, don't take the TV. We have no use for that. Don't leave the radio right there on the stand. What we need is burn the books, because the
Yep.
books are keeping us broke. It's the high prices and the installment loans that they force us to pay, not like the credit that they was getting in suburbs that allowed them to pay less for the product, and it was less payments. They gave us the stuff that was going to keep us in bondage. So we worked more. Worked more, got paid less, and but paid more for the goods. So when they destroyed the white businesses, they made sure that they burned the books,
Mm-hmm.
and that the business burned down. So burn the books so there's no records on who owed what. So at that time, thank goodness they didn't have computers and files and all types of stuff, because I'm sure a lot of families got away with being put in that bondage. And as you said,
Absolutely.
we still see predatory installment programs today. Rent a center, you
Come
know,
on. Come
that's
on.
one of them that's put in every neighborhood in the city. I don't see as many because they probably got they changed it RAC, because they probably got sued so many times they had to just don't call it rent a center, just call it RAC. Maybe people
Mm-hmm.
forget, but that's a
Mm-hmm.
place that you paid over price for goods.
They do it
So
in that Value City. They
Value
do it right at
City,
Value City. They say,
Banger Hut,
okay, yep. They say, well, we'll run your just put in your name and how much you make, and then we'll give you no zero interest for uh, 90 days, and
Price
then if you
Busters.
don't and then if you don't pay in 90 days, they hit you with some crazy like a crazy interest rate, right?
They just got a lawsuit from that. Just got a lawsuit. Progressing Leasing just got sued, and they had to pay out because they would do that. They would say no down payment, no interest in 90 days, but they didn't tell you how much they was going to attach to your bill if you paid out in them 12 months. It doubled the amount of your bill, and that was
Mm-hmm.
unlawful because they did not tell people. So now they had to mention it. These practices still happen in 2020, 2021 to 2022.
Exactly. And then there's another company in Baltimore who they'll let you if your car is worth something, let's say you have a paid off vehicle and you need some money, you can borrow
Right.
against your car. And if you default on that, they take your car from you. So like you say, this stuff is still happening, right here, like you
Yeah.
said, right in 2022. It's still happening. All right. And so then they said, okay, well, we got to deal with this we got to deal with this rioting. What can we do? What can we do? And so they came up with, it says in the aftermath, I'm at the bottom of page 146, by the way, Brother T. In the aftermath of the riots, the Banking and Currency Committee in the Senate held 2 separate hearings to discuss the problem of the poor paying more and what could be done about it. And so they started coming up with things, right? And I don't want to read everything, but they said, oh, well, we should put more Black owned businesses in the Black community, right? So you already recognize that this community is impoverished, and your solution is to put businesses in there. Well, more black-owned businesses in the community. And they also said, and then we're going to put a black credit union in the community, or a black credit card company in the community. This is what we're going to do. And these were their solutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not understanding that this stuff was done in like the late 1800s. All of this stuff that they were proposing in the 1960s, this is stuff that was tried and failed in the late 1800s. And so anyway, brother T, I didn't know if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Situating these lenders to a broader framework makes the disparity even more striking. Talking about the loans. Because of the high defaults and loan losses of ghetto lenders, they could not participate in the robust credit markets that were driving down the credit prices in the suburbs. These lenders paid more for capital because they could not sell their loans into the secondary market. So once again, they sold to our ancestors couches that were worth nothing, appliances that was worth nothing, right?
Oh, you went back. You went back again.
Yeah, I'm just because it's on page 146.
Okay, go ahead.
And this is when we were stuck paying these things regardless. These are the businesses that they placed in our neighborhoods. They sold subpar products.
Absolutely.
Products they couldn't sell in the suburbs, but they sold it at a higher cost. So these businesses were no benefit to us. They didn't sell these items at a price that we could afford. They didn't sell quality products. We were still putting into financial ruin because now we're sitting on a couch that ain't worth nothing, but we still got to pay for it. So now that affects us in the way that we could not get any more store credit, and that started a cycle as well. So, and it says they were stuck in an ancient debt market while the rest of the country had taken off into a modern world. So we still was not given the credit that benefit. We got the credit for products that were not benefit. They were more appliances. And let's think about this. We learned in last chapter that certain Americans got credit that allows them to buy homes, mortgages, and to expand their net worth. And we remember a couple of years ago that Jay-Z made that comment about the Jews buying up all the homes, and you know how they did it. And he says credit.
Right.
Well, the Jews organizations got on them for saying that. Like, don't say that because you're giving the assumption that we own the banks and that we own. What he should have said was, you know how they got it? By United States government credit lending. You know what I'm saying? If he would have just dug a little deeper and says the reason why certain immigrants got those benefits because they was labeled as white and they were given things that we wasn't given.
Absolutely.
Even though it's credit, it's not the credit we see today, Jay-Z. It's the credit that was implemented early in the 60s. It was the beginning of credit. And it was a credit worthiness that was given to the suburbs that was not given to that red line district. Be more specific when you say things so we can learn and not just jam to the tune. That's what me.
T, where's your sound?
Oh.
You got to hit me with the. That was woo.
You know what I'm saying?
Be more specific.
Be more specific on what these things are so we can learn.
That's right.
He wanted to throw a shot and they caught it and said, no. Don't blame me. Go back in history. They didn't say this, but we had to go back in history to see exactly how we were shut out. We were shut out by the credit worthiness that we wasn't given.
That's right.
So we could not do it, Mr. Carter. We could not benefit from buying in Dumbo with the credit because we wasn't given it.
We wasn't given it.
So that's the point I wanted to make.
No, facts. Wonderful point and well received. And so on page 149, they mentioned, she mentions, I'm sorry, that the 1970 Fair Credit Reporting Act was passed, and in 1974 you had the Equal Opportunity Act, the ECOA. Was passed, and it said it was the advocacy of feminist groups that ushered in, the equal credit laws. It says which eliminated race and gender identification from loan applications and forced lenders to use credit scores based on based purely on financial information and data. I do want to read this one sentence. It says, before their passage, even affluent women could not get a credit card. These anti discrimination provisions also apply to minorities, but women and other minorities were not similarly situated. And so, of course, Brother T, when they pass something, they got to make sure they keep us where we are, right? And so they found a new way to discriminate against us, and that was by zip code. All right, that was by zip code. So it said lenders, because we got to remember, because of the redlining, Brother T, we all lived in a certain area. So based on these zip codes, and they still do it, Brother T, they'll tell you, like, you don't have to put your, you don't have to put your ethnicity on the application, but let you put 21218 on your zip code. They know exactly, oh, this is a black neighborhood,
Red line.
red line, or go ahead and put in Baltimore 21207 on your zip card. Put that on you. So they might tell you, oh, we don't discriminate based on race anymore. You don't even have to put your race on an application, but you do have to put your address on there, right? And based on your zip code, they know exactly who you are. They know who lives in that area. And so it says right here that they use zip codes as a proxy for race. And zip codes were perfect indicators of a community's racial and economic makeup because segregation almost perfectly correlated geography with race. All right. And so then, Brother T, on top of saying, oh, well, we could fix the problem of black poverty with uh, credit cards, black owned businesses, black banks, another program that they proposed was financial education. We need to give them financial education so they can know when they're getting got, right? So that was, Brother T, that was another one, and so that we gotta give them financial, education. And so that was another proposal. And then I'm trying to think. I have some other stuff highlighted. I'm on the bottom of 150. So is there anything, Brother T? It says the only way to eliminate. Okay, and so she says, in reality, all these solutions were incomplete and short-sighted. The only way to eliminate the drastic credit disparity was to eliminate the wide disparity in wealth. And that's what, and so, Brother T, do you want to expound on that?
Yeah, I wanted to stay on that page because the misunderstanding of the problem entirely is back that Dr. Jared Ball made a point of financial education is not enough, but it is something that we should have understanding of, because you want to know exactly how things work. But in this thing, on that second chapter, it says misunderstanding the problem entirely. The FTC admonished lawmakers to create financial education programs so that blacks would enter into exploitative contracts, so they would not enter to exploitative contracts. So after you gave it to us for so many years, now I'm saying, did y'all learn? Did y'all learn? Hold up. Let me get you something so you can make sure you won't do it again. They should never have been created. It's almost like cutting them and then say, here's the Band-Aid. No, you should have gave us preventive care prior to cutting us. Showed us how to stay away from the harsh treatment. But you gave it to us. We suffered, and now you want to create a program in order to give us the education to stay away from it. The education should have been there prior to how this stuff works, but they never gave us a fair shake. So that goes off to what you were saying. I wanted to make that point. It's like it's always a shame to put a Band-Aid on a situation. They always want to give us something after the fact, and it still didn't give us what we actually needed. The financial education was good. Okay, yeah, we should know about it, but you already abused us. We already suffered. We already left behind. It's not like the financial education was going to be the tool to erase 200 plus years of discrimination. It's not going to do it. It's just saying, look out for contracts that could put you in a bind.
But then T, I just want
Period.
to add this. I wanted to add this. A lot of black people said they already knew that. So
Right.
they were like, you giving us this education. We already knew that. We're in a
But
situation where we don't have a choice. We have to go down here because look, my husband may not be working. I may not be working. We got to go down to this store to get food for our babies. And so we have to enter into this installment plan or this contract
right,
where we pay installments for food, for furniture. So when they came up with this whole idea of financial education, black folks were saying, I already knew this.
I already knew
We already know that we're being exploited, right?
it. Right,
Because but we're in a situation where we have no choice. And so, like you said, Brother T, if you really want to get us out of this situation, put us in a position where we do have a choice. So
right,
you're giving this financial education saying, look out for this, look out for that. But I don't have a choice to not engage in that.
right.
You get what I'm saying? And
You
so
you gave the suburbs the credit that reduced their risk. You gave us risk induced pressure on our end. We got two different credits. Yes, giving credit wasn't the battle. Giving us the right type of credit was going to be helpful. Now you're telling us what to look for. Oh, look for the right credit. Eventually you'll get that, but
come
not
on.
today. Right now you're getting high interest installment payments. Take that piece. That's basically what they're saying. That's basically like
Exactly.
it's
That's what they
crazy.
said. Yeah, that's it. It was. I agree 100% with you. And so at the bottom of page 151, it says Congress was clear on this point. These are not programs to bring about major structural change,
Right.
okay, in the economy or to generate large numbers of additional jobs. So giving black people, they talking about the credit, banks, businesses, financial education. That didn't bring about the changing of this structure, right? And again, remember I said this structure was designed to maintain a racial hierarchy where you have
Okay.
so-called whites at the top, so-called blacks at the bottom. So none of these programs that they proposed and created did anything to eradicate that racial hierarchy. It did nothing to eradicate black poverty. Okay. And so I do want to mention that. Moving on to page 152, because I know we like got 10 more minutes, but moving on to page 52. I love how she drives home that whites really started believing that black poverty was because of moral failing. Like it was, like it was something, and people still say this about black folks. Oh man, black people have money if they stop spending it on Gucci and Louis, and if
Stop
they
listening to
make
rap music.
stop listening to rap music, if they got their families together. So they really tried to act like being impoverished was our fault, like it was some fault of ours. Not that black ghettos were created or black poverty was created from the government. It was the government that created black ghettos and black poverty. Let's be clear. So the government said no, it wasn't us. It was some moral failing going on with you all, right? It was some moral failing going on with you. And then you had protesters, right? Because it says the war on poverty. Remember, there was this war on poverty. It said the protesters were calling it handouts. So, are you giving these black people handouts as if, and I just was on a show, and peace to the people who are in the chat who may have seen the show. I was just on Fox Soul
Tammy Mack.
television again. Yep, Tammy Mack, being black, the business of being black with Tammy Mack this past Wednesday. And we talked about.
This guy keep on giving me your flowers, Dr. Ma. You representing and you definitely teaching as you go.
I appreciate that, Brother T. I appreciate that. But I was on there going up again. It was a panel discussion. It was myself, and shout out to Sister Zakia. She did a wonderful job. But it was another brother on there, Jacory. He did a wonderful job
Excellent.
just articulating why we deserve reparations. And then there was a brother. His name is Derek. And I don't know if Derek is a plant or what, but they bring Derek on to give this opposing view of reparations. And he mentioned handouts. I don't need to take a handout. Brother, it's not, these are handouts. This is what is owed. This is a debt that is owed to us. And it shouldn't be viewed as a handout. And so I see how, in this chat, on this page, on page 152, she says the war on poverty eventually ran up against a torrent of protests and accusations of favorable treatment, and its handouts quickly became a target of conservative scorn. And so I always say that, you have white privilege, but there's a such phenomenon, a strong one, of white ignorance. So you got white privilege and you also have white ignorance. Brother T, did you want to chime in?
No, that's it. You put on a point there. I want to go to your next point.
Okay, the next point is President Johnson and how he went to Howard University in 1965, and he gave a speech where he told black students at Howard, that America failed, the Negro, and that freedom was not enough. So he says that, and he talks about the legacy of past injustice, and he mentions this. He says this. I'm at the top of page 153 for those who are following us. He says, "You do not take a person who for years have been hobbled by change and liberate him, bring him to the starting line of a race, and then say you're free to compete with all others and still justly believe that you have been completely fair." So he says that. He further acknowledged that blacks were trapped in an we inherited gateless poverty, which stems from a devastating heritage of long years of slavery and a century of oppression, hatred, and injustice. So this is what he's saying. But in the same breath, Brother T, I've got to go to the bottom. It says, in the end, Johnson exhorted his audience to change their own circumstances. So wait a minute. I'm going to acknowledge that I did all of these things to you.
Right.
But at the end, I'm going to tell you to change your own circumstances, and stating that nothing is more frightened with meaning for our own destiny than the revolution of the American Negro. So we put you in this position, but it's your responsibility to dig yourself out of it.
And this is when things started to change. So when they start making earlier on that, hey, we want to stop changing things and start putting things on race alone, and we want equality because we want privileges as well as being white. Now they changed it and says it's a cultural thing. It's your fault. It's the way that you have been put together. And I want to focus on Daniel Patrick Moynihan. The Moynihan report. How many people have heard about the Moynihan report? Because this guy, as we've seen, was close to LBJ, but then he became also important in the Nixon administration. And as we've seen here, that in the principal author of the cultural theory of poverty, Daniel Patrick Moynihan was also the principal author of Johnson's speech. So this person wrote a lot of LBJ's speeches. Then when he came to the next administration of Nixon, he became an advisor. Now, I want you to focus on this. The Moynihan report showed that, yes, blacks are impoverished, but I think we've done all we can do with them. Just let them be. So that's when the change started to happen. Nixon says, let's change black power to black capitalism. Let's change black power to black business ownership. But what we're going to do is give them less government programs, because you want to do it for yourself, right, black man? You want to build your own communities, right, black woman? Let's do it. Let's do it. Rah, rah, rah. Guess what? But we're not going to help. We're not going to help. We're just going to we're going to cheer you on. Based off the Patrick, I want you to read this. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the Moynihan report. One of the guys that I followed, Shannon Rawls, just read the whole thing on his page. But if you can find it on the internet, the Moynihan report, because it's very important. Because later administrations use this man's report in order to deal with a lot of stuff that we got through social service. It was a program that was in 1986 called The Vanishing Family. I just put that clip on my Instagram, and it showed that Bill Moyer from CBS interviewed a group of black single mothers and said, do you think it's important to raise this child with a father? And one girl said, no, I never had a father there,
Mm,
and I don't feel see that a father is substantially important in the home.
mm,
Then you think about the laws that were written in certain jurisdictions, the no man in the house law, that women could not receive any federal funding if there was a man in the house. There's court cases to prove it. They took the study that was in the 60s, implemented in the 80s, which we know what happened in the 80s, the crack. They took more black men from the house. They all based it off Daniel Patrick Moynihan's report.
mm. Hit the do-do-do-do-do. Woo! Oh man, T. And so I just want to move on to page 155, where she says that
Mhm.
the war on poverty quickly morphed into the war on crime.
Wow.
And I remember watching the Netflix documentary. I think it was called First Amendment. Was it First Amendment or 15th Amendment?
13.
13th. There we go. The 13th
Mhm.
Amendment. And they talked about that. And one of my intellectual shero. She was in the film, Dr. Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book, The New Jim Crow. And so she talked about how they started using that rhetoric, law and order. Everything was law and order. So
That's right.
instead of talking about, instead of just saying we're going to discriminate against black people, they just say, we're going to fight this war on crime. And law and order became the language that they were using. He says the language of former white supremacists, all right, who were now engaged on the front lines of the war on crime. And so she mentions at the top of page 156 Ronald Reagan. Okay, and
Mhm.
he ran campaign ads, based on that. He was showing footage of the riots, and warning that every day the jungle draws a little closer. So what he was doing was running a fear campaign, brother T.
Mhm.
We gotta be tough on crime. We law and order, and running a fear campaign. And he also says that the news story of the ghetto focused on violence and erasing the poverty. This news story of the ghetto focused on the violence erasing the poverty beneath. So no one wants to talk about, I remember Dr. Amos Wilson in his book Blueprint for Black Power. He says that most, if not all, of our social problems are connected to our economic problems, right? And
Mhm.
so when they shifted from the war on poverty to the war on crime, okay, now they're saying we're going to fight crime. The focus is going to be violence, but it's not addressing what the cause of the violence is, okay, or the root cause of the violence. So, brother T, do you want to describe the Kerner report? You want to summarize that for the listening audience, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, that you do it. Before you do that, can I just make one point
Go ahead,
that
please.
I missed? Because
Please, please, please do.
I focus so much on this part more than that. Okay, Moynihan acknowledged that American racism was the original sin, responsible for the gap in economic opportunity. Having diagnosed the problem as being rooted in historic harm, he proposed that the way to fix it was to address Black culture, which he called a tangle of pathology.
Mm,
Specifically, the Moynihan report blamed the prevalence or the prevalence of single mothers for the deterioration of the Negro family. That's why I said I need people to go see The Vanishing Family, the CBS special by Bill Moyer, because they focus on single mothers based off this report. But they did it so far away, so people didn't catch it. But I'm telling you now, specifically, the Moynihan report blamed the prevalence of single mothers for the deterioration of the Negro family, which was the principal source of most of the apparent inadequate antisocial behavior that serves and perpetuate the cycle of poverty and deprivation. So this is prior to the war on crime. Now moving from poverty, they said that the pathology, the reason of this diagnosis was is because of the single motherhood, the fathers leaving the house. That's the reason why we should focus on crime. We need to focus on the behavior of this culture because that's what's going on.
well, thank you for making that point, brother T. And so the Kerner. So look at this. It says by 1968. President Johnson was mirrored between black-led violence in the ghetto and a growing conservative backlash. According to the White House advisor, what could he do but set up a commission and say a prayer? So he set up this coroner commission, the Kerner commission. It says which relied on hundreds of researchers who collected testimonies and statistics. Right, it was the first thorough governmental exploration of Black economic disparity, and the
Mhm.
first draft of the report was titled "The Harvest of American Racism." It says that it was a forceful denunciation of the failure of Great Society programs, which the report dismissed as tokenism that did not tamper enough with the white power structure to have an impact. The administration was so angry about the first draft that it fired all 120 social scientists who had worked on it. So these social scientists told them the daggone truth that none of these programs work. It didn't change the white power structure. And so for that, they got fired. So then it says the final report was less damaging to Johnson's reputation, though less blunt. Okay. And so, in the report, it says this that what white Americans have never fully understood, here's white ignorance, but what the Negro can never forget is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it. But white folks say that, brother T. No, I'm not racist. They start crying in front of you.
Mhm.
But then I remember Jane Elliott. She's in front of a group of white students at college, and she said, raise your hand if you want to be, treated as blacks or treated in the society. And other whites were looking around like this in the audience, right? And then she said, maybe you didn't hear me. She said, raise your hand if you want to be treated the way our black people are treated, and black people are treated in the society. She said, oh, you know, so you understood the question, and you know that you don't want it for yourself. She said, my question is, why would you want it for other people? So they condone it. They condone it, brother T. And so anyway, it says that the report had warned us that our nation is moving toward two societies, one black and one white, and it offered like three scenarios. Okay, where it said the first was just maintaining the status quo, the second one was promoting, I guess, promoting separatism. The third one was complete, integration. And she said basically they chose the second one, right, where they went for separation. Okay. The report came out in February the 29th, 1968. And that was that. So it's a report. I'm gonna be honest, T. I've heard about this report for years. Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Amos Wilson talked about this report in his book Blueprint for Black Power. And I've been saying, like, I just want to read the report. I'm like one of those folks. I don't want to just kind of get, uh, little excerpts from books that I've read about it. I really want to sit down and read the report for myself. But the report did come out February the 29th, 1968. So I said, oh, that was a leap year. All right. And then she moves the discussion into towards the end of Dr. King's life and what he thought about. All right. So bear with me, family. We got about four more pages to discuss, 4 or 5 more pages to discuss. So it says, towards the end of his life, King came to the realization that achieving racial equality would require radical measures of integration and poverty alleviation that the government would not pursue. So he realized that in order to literally to get rid of black poverty, it's going to have to be a mass redistribution of, power, wealth, and resources. And they're not going to do that. These white folks aren't going to do that. So then King started, he led the people's movement. He wanted to address poverty. He said that's a major structural reform of the American economy was needed. So he created, him and his team, they were leading the people's movement. And in his last speech, before he was assassinated, I believe it was April the 4th, 1968, Dr. King, he said this, and I have next to this Dr. King's Black nationalism, which they don't show you when they talk about Dr. King on the television, around his birthday time. But it says in his last speech, he says, I've been to the mountaintop. He pleaded, we've got to strengthen Black institutions. I call upon you to take your money. And I think he said this speech in a cathedral, at a cathedral in Washington, D.C., all right, a few days before he was assassinated. Someone in the chat can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that I'm right. It was in Washington, D.C. at a cathedral. But he said in his last speech, I've been to the mountaintop. We pleaded. He pleaded, we've got the strength. We've got to strengthen Black institutions. I call upon you to take your money out of the banks downtown, deposit your money in Tri-State Bank. We want a bank in movement in Memphis. Go by the Savings and Loan Association. We're telling you to follow what we, the SCLC, are doing. Put your money there. You have 6 or 7 Black insurance companies here so it's Memphis. It's not Washington, D.C. Cathedral. I'm thinking about another speech that he did I think it was like I want to say it was it may have been in March 1968, but I'm thinking about at the Washington, D.C. Cathedral. So I guess he was giving this speech in Memphis. So it's not that. He says, take out your insurance there. We want to have insurance in. So he's calling for bank in movements and insurance in. Okay, he advocated black banking as a key weapon in his arsenal of nonviolent resistance. He believed his most successful Northern project was Operation Breadbasket, which proclaimed, if you respect my dollar, you respect my person. This was an expression of the don't buy where you can't work Harlem boycotts. He said we will no longer spend our money where we can't get substantial jobs. It says he describes the philosophy of Operation Breadbasket as the belief that many retail business and consumer good industries depleted the ghetto by selling to Negroes without returning to the community any of the profits through fair hiring practice. And we talked about that, before, how that still happens today. You know how Black folks go into an Asian establishment and say, there's no Black people in here. Where the Black people at? And then, you go back maybe a couple of weeks later and there's one Black person from the neighborhood working in there, or the owner tell you that he donated to the school up the street or something like that. So this stuff is still happening. Kind of reminds me of when I said that, I was thinking about the movie Do the Right Thing, when the brother with the boom box.
Radio Raheem.
Remember he walked in there, yo, Sal, why you got both of them? It wasn't him. It was the other guy. I forgot his name. He played in a lot of Spike Lee movies too. But he said, yo, Sal, where the pictures of the brothers on the wall? Why you put So the same thing, Right. So anyway, that's what this kind of reminded me of. But Dr. King was really calling for Black nationalism. That's what he was talking about. Bank Black and buy Black. Start our own Black institutions, hire our own people. That's where he was. He was on the Black nationalist kick, by the time because he realized the government's not going to do anything they're not going to tinker with the white power structure. So we need to strengthen our own Black institutions. Right. Now, Black nationalism would work, if we created a closed feedback system, right? Where the dollar was solely circulated, amongst us, and not only circulated, but it was able to be multiplied. So circulated and multiplied. But we already saw how in the late 1800s, that wasn't the case, because Right. Black banks may give you the money and then you say, well, I'm going to go buy a house. And remember, back then, the white folks were the realtors. They owned the property. So now the check is now going to white banks, white realtors. So the money would seep out of that closed feedback loop, right?
Right.
Absolutely. So, so moving on to at the bottom, she begins to talk about Stokely Carmichael. So, Brother T, go ahead and summarize Stokely Carmichael.
The Black movement tone demands the orientation. So this is like when this is the last paragraph on 159. Stokely Carmichael famously initiated the shift with his pivotal 1966 speech, right? Everybody owns our neighborhood except us. We want Black power, right? So this is when he focused on that term, Black power. The new leaders held that civil rights reforms have been meaningless in the face of poverty, a position King himself would have agreed with. As we talked about how he changed from talking about Black nationalism, but strengthening our Black institutions. So Carmichael was basically now making that shift and saying, hey, we need to start doing for self. And you made a good point by the closed system. I also wound up watching a video about how the dollar circulates and how that myth was dispelled as we learned about the propaganda and myth of black buying power with Jared Ball, that we need to have total ownership of the process and the making of the product. Because if we're going to rent the house or own the house, it should be black builders, and black builders also be getting the lumber and making sure they get the metal and everything that's needed for the house in order to have complete ownership of that cycle. So it has to be everything we own to actually benefit in our communities. So Carmichael basically says the economic foundation of this country must be shaken if black people are to control their lives. In inflammatory language that made the black activists notorious, he said he wanted a black power movement that will smash everything Western civilization has created.
Ooh, say that
Before,
again. Say that again.
see, he basically said that we want black power movement that will smash everything Western civilization has created.
Go,
You have to
hit the button for Stokely Carmichael. Kwame Hit the yeah. We got to give it up for Kwame Ture. We got to give it up for him, the ancestor. Peace be upon his soul. Peace be upon his soul.
We seeing that we now, no matter what law was put into place, it was always a shell just to hide the real intent, to keep you where you need to be. We just want to give you the perception that you've made it, but we know that we're not giving you the tools in order to make what you need to get done. So he assessed it correctly. You have to destroy it completely and rebuild it.
It ain't no damn reform. We gotta reform it. The system is broken. We gotta reform. No, the system needs to be eradicated. It needs to be shut down. All right. And so then she moves on to talk about Malcolm X. And she talked about how Malcolm X was like, hell, yes, let's be segregated. Let's be separate. He was black nationalist out. He was black powered out, and peace be upon Malcolm X as well. That beloved ancestor. So he said this. He was just like, look, he wasn't interested in speaking to whites. He said, or even wealthy blacks, who he blamed for exploiting the poor. It says, like Garvey, he rejected integration, saying that the white man would never allow blacks to enter his house anyway, which I agree. He says to Malcolm, the ghetto was a colony, and the only solution to achieve black economic prosperity was to control all of the levers of economic and political power within the black community. Malcolm was not asking white Americans to provide equal rights for blacks. He was uninterested in anti-discrimination laws. He wanted an uprising. He urged the black movement to reconsider their failed strategies of nonviolence. It says his radical call to arms terrified the public. J. Edgar Hoover, FBI spied on him for most of his life. And then she mentions his one of his famous speeches, The Ballad of the Bullet. I actually played that like a year ago. And to my audience, and it says that his economic plan was really strikingly similar to King's, but Malcolm's rhetoric was more inflammatory and sometimes laced with threats of violence, So then she moves on to she closes actually this chapter by talking about Huey P. Newton and the Black Panther Party. Peace be upon Huey P. Newton's soul. So she talked about the Black Panther Party and how, Newton created the Panthers to organize the ghetto as King had organized the South. And so we all know about the Black Panther Party. They had breakfast programs and they demanded, Black power. They had the 10-point program, right? They had a 10-point program, and says their mission was to coordinate random violence in a coordinated movement, or more accurately, a revolution. I don't know. When I read that part, I was like, I don't know. I just remember they was just like, look, you pull a gun on me, I'm pulling a gun on you. You fire at me, I'm firing back at you. I'm not, you're not going to spray me with water hoses. You're not going to do, you come for me, I'm coming for you, and that was their mentality. Really, when I've studied, the Black Panther Party. But they proposed a 10-point program, and it says this was a list of wants, right, which could be summarized in the 10th point. It said it was an all-encompassing point. They said we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. As to beliefs, that they believe in the right to self-defense, self-determination, fair trials, and a reversal of centuries of racist policies. It says, they said, they declared that whenever any form of government became destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people. But don't they say this in their constitution? Isn't it somewhere in the Constitution? But anyway, it says, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem more likely to affect their safety and happiness. So it says the Panthers' mission in sum was to throw off the despotic regime, which in this particular case was the United States government. Give me the do for the, give me the sound effect for the Black Panther Party. Salute to the Black Panther Party, and salute to those Panther Party members who are still locked up. They're still locked up. Some Panthers have been locked up for about 50 years, 40, 50 years. I'm sitting here. His name is, oh my goodness, his name is no, it wasn't Mumia, but Mumia is still locked up. Mumia is locked up. Matulu Shakur is still locked up, right? Matulu Shakur, Mumia, but it's another one. Sundiata Acoli. That's what I'm thinking about. Brother Sundiata Acoli. So these brothers have been behind what we call the G wall, have been behind the G wall, for a minute. And so we just got to do what we can, whether write them or put something on their books just to show their appreciation. They literally sacrificed their lives for Black empowerment. And so salute to all of them. Salute to all of them. All right. So Brother T, we'll be next week discussing chapter 6, the decoy of Black capitalism. All right, next week, family, we're going to be discussing chapter 6, the decoy of Black capitalism. So tonight we discussed the chapter 5. All right, what was it called? Civil rights dreams, economic nightmares. That was chapter 4 of The Color of Money, Black Banks, and the Racial Wealth Gap. All right, and so like I said, if you don't have the book, still tune in. If you didn't read the chapter, still tune in, because it's always a powerful exchange between Brother T and I, and even when Brother Everett joins, it's always a lot of information being discussed. So even if you don't have the book, still tune in. Still tune into the discussions. And so I do want to shout out to people who hung with us. Black Buddha hung with us, Brother Simsu Netcha. Brother Simsu, you got to get back on the panel. We miss you, brother. Maybe Ra is in the building. CJ Young, I saw you join. You said I'm a little late, but he came through. A beautiful mind. She hung in there with us. Sister Anusha, peace to you, beloved. New Black World Order, peace to you, Brother King Aziz, peace to you, brother.
668.
Oh, is it?
Peeping in the chat.
Oh, Snug. He's always peeping in the chat. Crystal Denise, she's in the building. Brother Frank, he's always in Ghana. Brother, I'm surprised that you still up. I know that you all are like 6 hours ahead of us. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think Ghana is you all can tell me in the chat if I'm correct. I think they're like 6 hours ahead of us.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I think they're like 6 hours ahead of us, 4 to 6 hours.
2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, so it's like 2 in the morning for him, and he hung with us. He tuned in. So peace to you, Brother Frank. He's actually an educator at a school in Ghana, and we plan on deploying my STEM-based program over there. We're going to do it virtually, and so we're going to pilot it with his students, and so we're going to get the equipment, get him set up in the get him set up, and get all the equipment to him over the summer, and launch it in the fall. So, readings by Callie. I don't know if she's still in the building. New Black World Order, peace to you, brother. Yeah, I mentioned him. Okay. I mentioned him. All right, family. So join us back here next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, family, next Saturday, I have one of our esteemed elders coming on, Baba Nwali Mubarudi. We'll be talking about the identity crisis in the black community, the identity crisis of Africans in America, and even in the diaspora. Because I've been to the continent quite a few times, and Brother T, they, even though they didn't go through, chattel slavery as our ancestors did, they were colonized, right? They were colonized, and they were still, still abused and still violated. And a lot of them, you see white Jesus everywhere. When you go to Ghana, they got white Jesus all over the place, and it's just ridiculous. So, it's an identity crisis going on. Not only prevalent amongst Africans in the diaspora, but also continental Africans. So anyway, on next Saturday we'll be discussing the identity crisis of African diasporan Africans and continental Africans, and also talking about his new book called Identity. I can't wait to read it. He has a new book called Identity, and I know it's going to be fire. All right, family. So I'll see you next Saturday, or I'll see you next Sunday. Have a black-tastic week.
Peace.
Peace.